Greetings and durud. Welcome to Farhang Connect, Farhang Foundation's live virtual talk series featuring distinguished Iranians from around the globe. I'm Alireza Ardakani, CEO of Farhang Foundation. We are a non-political, non-religious, and not-for-profit organization that thrives with the support of its members. Our sole mission is to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture, enriching the global community. Today, we welcome you for what promises to be a captivating conversation with one of the world's leading contemporary artists working today for YZ Kami, the messenger. We are honored to welcome YZ Kami in person, who will be joined in conversation with two brilliant art scholars and historians, Dr. Fereshteh Daftari and Dr. Robert Storr. Now, to get things going with today's program, it is my pleasure to welcome today's moderator. She serves as chair of Farhang Foundation's Fine Arts Council, who oversee all of Farhang Foundation's fine arts projects and initiatives. Additionally, she is the founder of ADVOCARTSY Art Gallery, a leading platform specializing in Iranian contemporary art. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ms. Roshi Rahnama.
Greetings. And thank you for having me. I'm honored to have this opportunity to moderate this exceptional panel today on behalf of Farhang Foundation. Today, we welcome internationally renowned Iranian artist, YZ Kami, for an illuminating virtual conversation on his artistic journey and profound body of work. Known for his meditative, large-scale portraits, luminous dome paintings, and installations exploring the human spirit and the infinite, Kami's art bridges the sacred and the contemporary, inviting viewers into spaces of reflection and transcendence. Born in Tehran in 1956, he painted from early childhood with significant influence by his mother. Following high school, and after a year spent in Berkeley, California, he moved to Paris, where he studied philosophy at Sorbonne. In 1984, Kami moved to New York, where he continues to live and work today. Kami has exhibited expansively worldwide, as will be discussed in this program, with a recent exhibition in Gagosian Gallery, Los Angeles, earlier in 2025. Kami's works are in the collections of Metropolitan Museum of Art, Museum of Modern Art, Whitney Museum of America, Salman Art Guggenheim Museum in New York, as well as the British Museum, amongst others. Joining Kami in conversation are two of the most distinguished voices in the field of history and criticism. We will first hear from Dr. Fereshteh Daftari, curator and art historian, who received her PhD in art history from Columbia University and served at the Museum of Modern Art in New York from 1988 to 2009, where she curated a number of international exhibitions, including Without Boundary, 17 Ways of Looking in 2006. Her curatorial work in the field of Iranian modernism includes Between Word and Image at Gray Art Gallery, New York in 2002, and Iranian Modern at the Asia Society Museum in New York in 2013. She also focused on contemporary art. Action Now, the first exhibition of contemporary Iranian performance art, was held in Paris in 2012. And Rebel, Jester, Mystic Poet, Contemporary Persians at the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto in 2017. Dr. Daftari has published widely, and her most recent book is titled Persia Reframed, Iranian Visions and Modern and Contemporary Art. Next, we have the pleasure to continue with the brilliance of Robert Storr, one of the world's leading art critics, curators, and educators. Robert served as curator and senior curator of painting and sculpture in MoMA, 1990 to 2002, Dean of Yale School of Art, 2006 to 2012, and director of 2007 Venice Biennale with the exhibition Think with the Senses, Feel with the Mind, where he included paintings by YZ Kami. His extensive writings, including Writings on Art, 1980 to 2005, and Writings on Art, 2006 to 2021, as well as his landmark exhibitions on Gerhard Richter, Louise Bourgeois, Philip Gostin, and many others have shaped the discourse of contemporary art for decades. We will now welcome Dr. Fereshteh Daftari, whose presentation is an art historical introduction to YZ Kami's work, seen through the lens of time.
Thank you, Aniruzajan, and thank you, Roshijan. And maybe we should just go right ahead and start with the PowerPoint.
Please.
All right, so many of our viewers already know that YZ Kami is an Iranian-born New Yorker, best known for his portraiture and his architecture-inspired Dome series. However, his production is more varied than that. He has created works in different media and has tackled a number of subjects. For instance, in the center above, you can see a series of his abstractions titled Night Paintings from 2017-18. Below that is a sculpture from 2005, and these are flanked on the right by one painting from 2022, which is now in MoMA's permanent collection and comes from his Messenger series. On the left is a new work in a long line of paintings representing hands clasped in a gesture of prayer. This one is currently on view at the Centre Pompidou, Metz, and it's a magnified detail of a painting by Jan van Eyck that is at the Louvre. My attempt here is to give you an art historical overview of a journey which in retrospect appears to me to be an ongoing search for something essential and metaphysical, something that transcends prosaic visibility. Kami emerged on the New York art scene in the 1990s. On the screen, you see an installation shot of his large self-portrait as a child from 1990, which Stephen Madoff included in the artist's recent retrospective in Spain. In his writings, he has characterized the creator of this image as, quote, the messenger of distance, unquote. The medium of this work is encaustic, on photographs mounted on canvas. And it is quite large. It's about 259 centimeters high. The original photograph dates back to when Kami was 11 years old. In this murky image that conveys the dim memory of a younger self, Kami is revealing an interest in capturing a sense of time, autobiographical, but also art historical. The motif of the head fading into deep shadows becomes even more pronounced in the following works of the same series, as you can see here in the center of his studio. With such a device applied to an otherwise well-lit childhood photo, Kami manages to endow the modern medium of photography with the aura of an old master painting. Soft contours and images dissolving in shadows abound in Renaissance and Baroque works, described with technical terms such as sfumato and chiaroscuro. Although this old master aura pervades the portraits, makes it clear that you're looking at a contemporary work of art. He does this by resorting to photography for one thing, but also and especially by cutting the image into a grid-like composition that he then pastes onto the canvas. He leaves the process of its making exposed. Kami seamlessly sutures the past with the present in a vision of temporality that is uniquely his. It is as if the portraits belong to a present that is pregnant with the past, a kind of fluidity between the past and the present in a non-linear Proustian sense. In fact, in an interview, Camus noted a lecture he heard Roland Barthes give at the Collège de France in Paris when he was a student at the Sorbonne. The lecture was on Proust and photography. A hint of the future or of an afterlife already begins to appear in this work. In which way? In the following way, in the use of encaustic or hot wax painting. This medium has its own ancient history, such as in Fayum portraiture. It presages Camus' next exploration, which proposes a different time span, a spectrum that stretches beyond the here and now. More on that in a second. At the time this picture was taken, Camus was already painting. Now I need to spend a few minutes looking at his early background. Camus arrived in New York. When Camus arrived in New York, his artistic pedigree was already set. In reviewing his early steps into the field of painting, we also get a glimpse of how modernism first entered his native land. Paradoxically, the modern came in the guise of academic or classical realism imported from the West. Because it was based on observation, it turned the page on local traditions such as miniature painting, where fabulation and abstraction prevail over objective description. When Camus was 5 years old, he hung around his mother's studio, where he learned the craft of painting from Mahim Yousafzadeh, also a painter, an accomplished painter, whose self-portrait from the 60s you see on the screen. Camus later cropped this painting to its current dimensions. The slides I'm showing you now will allow me to make an observation not only about Camus' artistic genealogy, but also about the development of an alternative modernism conceived outside the old Western narrative. While Iranian modernism is highly complex, has its own chronology, and was quite pluralistic, one trend imported from Europe in the late 19th century persisted through much of the first half of the 20th century, and it lingered on long enough to affect Camus' aesthetic provenance. This trend may be traced back to the figurative painters of the classical or academic mode. To its followers in Iran, this form of expression was not viewed as conservative, but considered to be a modern progressive idiom by virtue of being Western in derivation and, unlike the traditional Iranian arts, being anchored in observation, in science, as one artist put it. Camus' first acquaintance with the art of painting took place in the Tehran of the 1960s. Yet he was immune to the various modernist movements, from post-impressionism to cubism, Iranian artists were experimenting with at the time, and even to the newly culturally specific modernism of the Saqakhune movement, as well as the calligraphic modernism that was emerging. The model to follow for both mother and son were the European old masters. On the screen, next to Mahim Yousafzadeh's self-portrait, you see a 1968 self-portrait painted by Mohammad Ali Haydarian, who was the eminent academic painter teaching at the Tehran Faculty of Fine Arts for many years. After his retirement, he shared a studio with his favorite student, Mahim Yousefzadeh. Tracing the stylistic lineage even further back, we go from Heydarian on the right to his illustrious teacher Muhammad Ghaffari, better known as Kamal el-Mulk, whose naturalistic 1910 portrait of an Iranian aristocrat you see on the left. On the left here, you see Kamal el-Mulk's Hall of Mirrors, completed in 1896, when he was the court painter to the Qajar king, Nasreddin Shah, whom he has portrayed not aggrandized as in traditional portraiture, especially during the Qajar period, but reduced to its human dimensions, a side effect of progressive modernity. The diminutive scale conforms to perspectival exigencies he is attempting to grapple with in this painting. It's interesting to note that the reverse process was occurring in the West, where artists were stepping away from their Renaissance tradition and its perspectival laws. They were moving towards greater abstraction. In the center of the screen, you see Kamal el-Mulk's copy of Titian's Entombment of Christ, which he painted in Paris at the Louvre. Mahim Yousefzadeh also followed this tradition of making copies of old master paintings. This one is after Velázquez's Lady with the Fan. Kami too made copies at a very early age, but unfortunately no examples have survived. This important figurative classicism continued as a trend, which in my writings I have termed Old Master Modernism. Its DNA flows through Kami's brushes and peaks in his portraits of the last decades, which are, however, more ethereal, more spirit than flesh. I should note here that Kami's aesthetic affinities and sources transcend the brief genealogy I just traced for you. He is equally receptive to Fayum funerary masks from Egypt and to Byzantine icons, as he is to Piero della Francesca or the seriality of minimalism, and his sources span from the medieval architecture of the Seljuk and Mongol periods to modern American cities. The same may be said of his interest in spirituality. It should not be pigeonholed to Sufism. All esoteric traditions outside organized religion interest this artist. Now, going back to the 90s and Kami's evolution after his self-portraits as a child, we can see that this notion of temporality, which I'm particularly interested in, expands to include the past, the present, and even beyond the here and now. On the screen, you see my mother was a falcon dress and I a falcon at her wrist of 1991-93. The title is paraphrased from the 1960s work by the gay American poet Robert Duncan. Kami is an avid reader of poetry, from Rumi to Hafiz, to William Blake and Cavafy, the Greek poet of Alexandria. The trigger for this work was the AIDS epidemic, which had not yet subsided in the early 90s. In fact, Kami's cousin and best friend, the brilliant Reza Abdo, perished of AIDS in 1995. He was 32 years old. Reza, whose portrait you see as the third young man from the right, was a playwright and a director of experimental theater productions. The architecture in the background is appropriated from an early photo of the Arg of Tabriz or citadel of Tabriz, dating back to the Ilkhanid period, a Mongol dynasty that ruled over Iran in the 13th and 14th centuries. Kami had visited the site, but the photo he used comes from a book on Persian architecture. The architecture is massive, austere, and bricks form its building blocks. Bricks reappear consistently in Kami's earth, either photographically reproduced as here, or as abstract elements gyrating in his dome series, as we shall see. Here you see only a section of the fortification, which was composed of a mosque, a mausoleum, and a containing wall. Posting on the stark monument portraits of young men, possibly doomed to premature mortality, eventually led to a series of portraits of men, and later on also women, dressed mostly in white t-shirts, staring at us, just as the Fayum portraits of the deceased peeked out of their graves and faced the life they sought to preserve for eternity. This work is pivotal in Kami's fascination with Fayum portraiture. The name Fayum comes from the region in Egypt where the portraits were found. They date back mostly to the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Christian era, when Egypt was under Roman rule. They are said to have been painted during the lifetime of the deceased and subsequently wrapped over their mummified bodies. On the left is an example from the Louvre, where Kami first discovered these portraits. In the center, a work from the Metropolitan Museum here in New York, and the other one is from the British Museum. In this slide, to the detail of the picture I showed you before, I'm comparing Kami's portrait of Reza with a Fayum portrait from the Getty Museum. And here you can see the similarities I talked about. Note also the drip paintings, both in white and red, which sort of jolt us to our contemporary period, to abstract expressionism. Again, Kami is conflating different temporalities, ancient and modern, with a nod to the afterlife by virtue of the encaustic medium and Fayum portraiture as a reference. I'm showing you this one again so that you can better see the drip paintings. Kami continued in this vein in a series of 18 oil paintings of mostly Middle Eastern young men dating from 94-95, and also in another series of untitled 16 portraits from 97-98, which are at the Whitney Museum in New York. These are paintings of men and women of different ages in grid-like compositions or groupings. Kami was not the first artist to create portraits in a series. Andy Warhol and Gerhard Richter come to mind. But his art is so profoundly imprinted, so infused with his vision of humanity, its passage in time and spirituality, that plagiarizing his unique gaze would amount to a frivolous exercise. A few years later, we encounter Kami's spiritual sensibility in his paintings of larger-than life-size portraits of figures, silently meditating, no longer alertly staring outwards, but rather with a gaze turned inward. In Homi Bhabha's words, these are simply quotidian mystics. You're looking at an installation shot of Without Boundary, the exhibition I curated at MoMA in 2006. The portraits date from 2005. The pigments Kami uses give his paintings the look and feel of dry, fading frescoes. Robert Storr, with whom I had the privilege of working at the Museum of Modern Art, will be speaking about these works and similar works, so I'm not going to dwell on them. With the portrait on the right titled Eva from 2013-14, Kami seems to indicate that luminosity is something internal to one's being, picturing something like an inner glow. The portrait on the left, an untitled work from 2010, represents his niece in a manner that has been described as Leonardesque. The same subjects reappear in his work over and over again. They're chosen from family, friends, acquaintances, and strangers. With few exceptions, what matters is not the individual identity, but rather the collective participation in the human saga. What distinguishes his portraits at this stage and marks a drastic departure from his classical influences is the blurring of the images. This device hints at the transitory presence of being that is on the verge of fading into not being, thus turning flesh to spirit. In fact, it is not clear if the subjects are meant to come into focus or are just about to withdraw from it. This mode of visualization conforms with Kami's belief that what matters is the flux. These are inhabitants of a realm between matter and soul that Sohrawardi, a 12th century Persian mystic, has termed Nakoja Abad, a kind of non-plus real. This past summer, Camus' paintings were included in the exhibition titled Dans le flou at the Orangerie in Paris, which was all about the blur. I've put together a number of images for you from different dates to make a general observation. When I look at these faces, what I see is the trace of time, from childhood to old age and the in-between. I'm not suggesting that capturing time is what Camus set out to do. Nonetheless, time is in the chemistry of the images he paints. When I turn to Camus' death mask of Blaise Pascal, the French philosopher, physicist, and mathematician, again I think about time. Here you have a death mask from a civilization different from the one that produced Vaillant Portraiture, but one that also evokes a temporality that post-dates an individual's lifespan. What is highly interesting here is that, like so many of Camus' portraits of living beings, this death mask is so blurred that the perceived tremor contradicts the eternal stillness of death, its finality. When at his exhibition in Paris, I stared into this image, which in a sense is a facsimile of death, I was for a second troubled, thinking that this dead man is breathing. He's actually breathing. Death is transcended when life is perceived in a continuum, in a continual flux, from one state to another, from being to not being, and perhaps back again. We might ask, what is the guiding engine of this process, if not time? I mentioned that Camus' work seems to aim for something essential. We just touched on his approach to existential matters. This search is evident in a different way in works inspired by architecture, specifically in his Dome series. Around 1996, Camus introduces the subject of domes with this diptych, which are included in the 1997 exhibition Architecture as Metaphor at MoMA. These are composed of digitally manipulated photographs mounted on canvas. One of the two domes draws your gaze into its tenebrous core, the other one leads you to luminosity. Gradually, representation slips away, leaving the specificity of monuments such as the Arc in Tabriz we saw before in favor of a more abstract concept in which only the bricks whirling around the center fill the composition. Being devoid of perspective, they could be imagined expanding beyond the picture frame. To this day, Camus continues with his Dome series. The works are created in different media and colors, including turquoise and gold. Camus has been an avid student of all esoteric belief systems, including the Jungian take on alchemy. His Black Dome, for instance, is not an objective rendition of sacral medieval architecture. It is reconfigured as a vortex of bricks that suck the gaze into the pitch black center, evoking a symbolic stage known in alchemical parlance as the nigredo. That is to say, the stage that precedes the luminosity that we find in his white domes. Camus' obsessive repetitions reveal how much he is invested in the alchemical process, which seeks to transform base metal into gold. His repetitions parallel the arduous labor that leads to the emanating light at the end of the ordeal. For Camus, he can correct me if I'm wrong, it is the metabolism of alchemy that matters and the quest for transcendence. This is not so esoteric, but quite relatable if we understand darkness as a pit of base instincts we start with, and light or lucidity as a metaphor for the polished consciousness we aspire to. This is an installation view of a traveling exhibition I curated with the Afghani collection. You can see how powerful the magnetic force of the Black Dome is. It draws you in, even though installed at the end of a long gallery. A drastic shift in Kami's language to total abstraction occurs around 2017-18. A series of these works were exhibited at the Gagosian Gallery in Rome. To me, these abstractions, titled light paintings, seem to convey the same underlying theme of flux. Vaporous shapes appear to be morphing from one state to another, from the visible to the ethereal. They don't look like any abstractions we have seen before. I'm going to end my presentation with one of the most recent iterations of Kami's Messenger series. This one was completed in 2024. Descriptively speaking, you're looking at a man, a pilgrim perhaps, one who has come barefoot on a journey from elsewhere. He is standing still, towering over his own shadow cast on a dusty road. Here time stops. This is a moment of pause, a moment of reflection. His back is turned to the viewer. With him, we gaze upon the dystopic modern city that is looming in the background. With him, we reflect on what this is all about. The scene, whether pointing to a specific location, LA, Los Angeles maybe, or to a generic modern city, resolutely elicits questions about a grander scheme of things. We might ask, what can this messenger of distance, quote unquote, one who displays none of the trappings of wealth, offer to a modern civilization sunk into its own toxic fumes? Maybe the artist, whom I have characterized as the one who quietly evokes the passage of time, who believes in flux, and is a skeptic of permanence, will enlighten us. Maybe he won't. He has often claimed that art is the only language through which he likes to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Fereshteh, for this brilliant presentation. Robert Storr will now be offering his philosophical insight and how much YZ Kami's work invites you to look at the mystery and what cannot be seen from the exterior, the riddle embedded without Kami's work. Robert?
Hello. Ferry sets a very high mark, and I'm afraid I cannot reach it, but I will just put in my 2 cents, as we say in this country. My 2 cents are essentially that if the paradoxes that Ferry talks about are essential ones to his painting, the one that Roshi just referred to is the one that fascinates me the most. As a visual person, what does it mean to say, I will make a visual artifact out of something that is invisible? And spirit is invisible, in fact. Spirit is not a substance. It is palpable in its effects on people, it's palpable in its influence on behavior, but it is not really a substance that is in any case representative of anything that we can depict. And so in making the portraits of spiritual states, Kami is setting himself a very, very tough problem. And he does it in a very straightforward way. He does it in a way that suggests that the only way in which you can experience spirit in paintings is by projection, not by reception of something that is there, but by projecting it back onto the thing you're looking at. And to do this, he really baits the trap by having people close their eyes. They do not see us. We do not see them. We do not see what they are looking at inside. And so we subject ourselves to a kind of speculation in that context about what might be going on inside their minds. And so if a person deep in meditation is looking inwards, what does he or she see? And how do they see? And how do they know what they're seeing is important to them? So depictions of meditation seem like a simple enough proposition. Just paint people who are meditating. But having a painting really resonate with meditation is another thing entirely. And the intensity of Kami's scrutiny of this experience is what makes it meaningful as a painting and what makes it meaningful as a document of his own thinking on this subject. we look at these unflinching portraits and we see people who, might just be people we meet on the street. But the ones where the eyes are closed, we know that they're not people we're going to meet on the street. And there are numbers of them of the same person. So there's this portrait of a man who is bald, who is looking down, and who resembles quite a lot like a guy I knew here in New York, who was in fact a meditator. And whenever I see this picture, I think of him, and I think of what extremes of spiritual discipline he subjected himself to, and that actually helps because although I know it is not him, I know that that information that I have is important. Now, this is one of the most intense, and the next one is a man who's entirely shaved head. It's called the green sweater, I think. Maybe this is the green sweater. This fellow here looks like a monk, but I don't think he is a monk. But it could be a monk, and his eyes are completely closed to our view, and yet he does not have a countenance of somebody withholding. This is not a hide and seek game. This is that he is totally absorbed by what he's seeing and thinking while he looks or doesn't look inwards. And the total absorption is the message of the painting. Now, I have done some meditating over recent years, not much, not by the comparison to what a seriously devoted spiritualist would be, but I know what it is. And I know that this is a state, kind of liminal state. It's before deep meditation. Or maybe it is deep meditation, who knows? But in any case, this fellow is just really on the threshold of an understanding that comes with just quieting everything around him. And much of what meditation consists of, at least in my experience, is quieting the world around you so that you know that it's there, but you don't pay attention to it. Or you know that your stomach is rumbling, but you don't pay attention to it. Or you know any number of things conceptually, but you don't pay attention to them because your attention is totally focused on a realm that is ungraspable, but perceptible nonetheless. And so he is completely hovering in that in-between state. And there are very few images of this intensity, of this particular type, anywhere in Western art. And for that matter, in art anywhere. You do find them in Buddhist sculpture. You do find them in some Zen painting. But this is really exceptional. And I think that we owe Kami a great debt of thanks for having identified that state and that place in the mind. But you see, it is not in the mind that we see it. We see it on his face, on his body, in his posture. We see it in his whole comportment. And knowing that that exists in him means that it can exist also in us. We can find our way there if we wish, if we discipline ourselves to. Okay. She is in the same state. And whereas the one before is almost the painting of a monk, this is very definitely the painting of a contemporary woman. Okay, this is very definitely the painting of a contemporary woman. We don't know in this case who she is, but we do see her as far more a contemporary figure than the last one. The last person is dressed in a manner that could be almost any time at all in the last several centuries, although we do know he's probably not of the last several centuries. She, I think, is definitely not from another time. And she is also completely turned inwards. And she is also, I don't know, one asks what is going on underneath that skull cap of hair. One asks what is going on behind those eyes. One asks these things, and then the only answer we can provide is our own intuition. And intuition is what painting is about, I think, ultimately. And what Kami does is to summon intuition to viewers who are inclined to go to paintings, to ask about particular things, and to project what they think the artist intends. And this is not about what the artist intends. This is about what we can experience thanks to the prompts that the artist provide. Now, I hear background noises suggesting that I'm really fading out. and I can feel my voice tightening. So maybe that's the time for me to quit.
Thank you very much, Robert. And now it's my pleasure to introduce YZ Kami, who will be sharing some personal conversation with us and to hear from him in his own words.
Thank you, Roshi John. Thank you, Ali Reza, Ferry, and Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. And to answer Roshi's question.
What a pleasure to spend this time talking about your brilliant work and career, Kami-John. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with you directly and in your own words about your work. I wanted to go over a few points that we wanted to share and focus on. One being one of your older works that is exceptionally intriguing, Dry Land, which was completed in 2004, which combines architectural photography and oil painting portraits. We'd love to hear from you directly about this magnificent work.
Thank you. Dry Land is a work that came out of a trip I made to Detroit in the late 1990s. And what I tried to experiment, and it took me several years, and especially that is a very large work of 4 by 8 meter, was to do the combination, to combine oil painted portraits with photography, which is the photography of a city architecture, and in this instance is Detroit. And the work has a certain relevance today because, you know, the title of it, Dry Land, is it comes from, you know, for centuries, people arrived in the US across the oceans. And when they arrived, they came to dry land. We called it dry land. And I think this particular work has a meaning today because of this controversy and this actual idea of immigrants and immigrations. And when I made the work, people said, but who are these people in the work? And I said, they're Americans. You know, Americans are all, without exception, with the exception of Native Americans, they're all immigrants. And here we have these people that are from all over the world, that they came through centuries to this land, and that is what America is about. So for me, dry land is America. And the simple fact that I selected Detroit was just a matter of chance. And then the other thing was that I found Detroit very intense and very photogenic. So it's very interesting that you're asking about that particular work.
I'm wondering, at the time that you created the work, was this a topic of immigration alive for you as much as it is now?
Certainly not as much. But the idea of the variety of people in this land that come from so many different backgrounds, from, you know, Europe and Africa and Asia and everywhere, has always been very present for me.
And never more relevant than the present.
They're never more relevant than present, exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing this beautiful work with us. I remember that the first time I met you in person was in Los Angeles at the opening of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art's exhibition in 2017 entitled Endless Prayers. And in that exhibition, you had a wide and expansive body of work that was showcased, including your portraitures and your more abstract dome paintings. I would love for you to share your experience with that exhibition with us.
The show, as you mentioned, was in 2017, and it did incorporate several aspects of my work. There were some very large portraits. There were one painting of large painting of prayer hands, dome paintings, and this work, which was in 54 pieces, that you just showed before this image, which was the title of the show came from the title of this work, Endless Prayers, and which is a combination of text and architecture in each work. The texts are either sacred text or poetry from in Persian, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, several, etc., several languages of Near East, and the forms in each work is inspired by Persian architecture and also by Byzantine architecture. The ceiling, the forms of different ceilings being a metaphor for heavens, for above. So this it was very interesting for me to be able to show this work at the same time and in the same space as the portraits, those meditative portraits that Rob referred to, and also a large painting of prayer, hands in prayer.
Yes. It seems like you are very much inspired by architecture. Can you share where that
I've always been, Roshi, I've always been, since I remember, I've always been very interested in architecture. Started with the trip that I made with my parents in Iran as a young teenager, and then later in Europe and other parts of the world. Yes.
Fantastic. You recently, in 2023, had an expansive exhibition in Florence. Can you let us know a little bit more about that and share that with us, please?
Yes. The exhibition in Florence, which was curated by Sergio Risaliti, the director of Novecento, was a very special experience. So my work was shown in different museums, in 4 or 5 different museums and a church. Here in this image, particularly this instance was very meaningful, and it touched me a lot because he had put these 3 portraits of like meditators, people with closed eyes. The center one is the one that Rob mentioned, and Rob had shown in Venice Biennale before that. The fact that it is shown in this salon at Palazzo Vecchio, which is called the Salon del Cinquecento, the whole salon is surrounded by this huge fresco of Vasari that is it's showing the different wars and triumphs of Medici family, especially the Battle of Marciano. So once you're in that room, that hall, you have all this scenery of violence and death and war all around you. You're surrounded by that. Besides the portrait of Michelangelo, I mean, the sculpture of Michelangelo, sorry, on the left that you can see. So this scenery of violence all around, and then you have these three figures at the middle of this room that they have closed their eyes, not in order not to look, to prevent themselves from looking, but to experience an inward instance. So the Florence exhibition had this kind of, instances and experiences. One was in Palazzo Vecchio. One was that I had done a portrait from a death mask of Brunelleschi. This is another painting that is called Isaac, that the first time was shown in London at Gagosian, and here is on an altar in Novecento that Sergio Risaliti installed it. And then there was the death mask of Brunelleschi that they showed it in the Museo Innocenti, which was actually built by Brunelleschi himself. And the other thing that was quite intriguing for me was in this painting, which was quite interesting to have this gold dome paintings of mine next to a early Renaissance, late primitive Italian painting that used gold. My use of gold was very connected to illuminations of sacred books like the Holy Quran and the Bible, and specifically the use of gold in Persian miniature. But here it was next to a early Renaissance painting and the use of gold with them. So it gave, for myself, it was quite a unique experience to go through this.
Fantastic. And this was across few museums?
Yes, it was across 4 museums and a church. And also in the church the church was the church of San Miniato, which overlooked Florence on a hill. And here it is. That's actually the first time that one of my prayers hand was shown in a, how do you call it, a sacred place, because before that was always either at exhibitions at Gagosian or was shown also at museums like LACMA or Muzak. But here was this painting is called Paul's Hand, and Paul being a friend. So it was quite an experience to see this painting in an environment of a church.
Beautiful. Just beautiful. Fantastic. If you are open to it, we can explore some questions from some participants who have been viewing. So the first question is, you were born in Tehran and later moved to the United States. How did your early life in Iran influence your artistic vision?
I was born in Tehran and grew up in Tehran. So I'm like 100% Iranian, born and raised there. And when I finished high school, I moved first to California to study. And I did like 1 semester at Holy Names College, a Catholic college in, I don't know why but that happened. Holy Names College in Oakland, and then 1 semester at Berkeley. But then I moved to Paris, and I stayed 10 years there before moving to New York.
And your studies in Paris were in philosophy?
Yes.
which is a very strong basis of your work.
I don't know about that. I studied all those years philosophy, and then I found out that I cannot write and I don't like to teach. So I couldn't do anything with philosophy, so I went back to painting.
May I interject something, which is that I said very little bit about how these things are painted, how the paintings are painted, but it's important because the graining of the brush marks is so fine and is so steady and accumulates, and it's sort of a physical manifestation of your concentration on the thing in front of you, and it's like skin. It's like, caressing somebody's skin over and over and over and over again. So it's a very, very, very charged sensual surface, even though it's photographic. And the photographic realism of your work is actually tactile realism at the same time.
But Rob, this is so true, and I'm really thrilled that you mentioned that. And I think the fact that you said that is because not only, I mean, besides you being a thinker, a curator, an art historian, you're also a painter. A painter could see that, yes, this is something that is totally lost in photographs, in images on the computer, or in books, is 100% lost. That's something that you have to be in front of the work in order to experience it. And this, for me, what you mentioned is the most essential part of my work, at my opinion, because the painting, after all, is the surface of the painting. It's not the surface of the computer or surface of the image that we see in a book, in an art book, is the surface of the painting. And each painter, I believe that each painter needs to invent his or her own surface, like they all did, surface of Jackson Pollock doesn't look like anyone else, it's his, or for that matter, Andy Warhol, or etc. But yes, all the layers, as you call the skin, yes, the skin of the painting.
And there's a French verb which is tâtonner, which is to feel or touch something to understand it. And one really needs to do that with one's eyes, to tâtonner ces images avec les yeux.
Yes, with the eyes. That's what we can do in front of the painting,
Yes.
but not on an image of the painting
No.
in the computer or in a book.
But once you've done it in front of a real painting, you can sort of supply that missing element to whatever you see in reproduction.
Your large-scale portraits often feel meditative and deeply spiritual. How do you approach capturing the inner life of your subject? That's the question for you.
I don't pretend to capture the inner life of the subject matter. I believe in what is said. I mean, is like that any portrait is a self-portrait. So is not about capturing the inner life of the subject matter. As Rob mentioned, that portrait of the meditator that Rob referred to, that bald man, could be a monk or could very well not be a monk. Is not, the biography of the sitter is irrelevant. Is what you feel, what the viewer feel or take from that encounter with the painting.
Fantastic. So the next question, I believe, is towards Robert and Ferry. As curators, what inspired you most about Camus' works? And how did you first discover him?
Well, I'll jump in there because my first time showing Camus was in an exhibition in 1990 something or other, early 90s, And it was
94.
Exit Art, yeah. And it was a show. It was an interesting show. It was four curators, and the mandate for the show was that each curator would put something into the mix, and then the other curators would respond from their deck of cards, so to speak. So that you would deal a card, and they would deal back something from their deck. And so in the case of Kami, that was to put him in the deck. He was showing it in town at that time, but he was not a well-known figure. And so I thought this was a kind of a wild card, although he's not a wild man, or at least not in my experience of him.
Fantastic.
But then I got to like him so much, and I got to like the work so much, that I thought, well, sometime I'll use him again. Sometime I'll go back to him and take a second helping. And then in the show in Venice, Think with the Senses, Feel with the Mind, the title itself addresses what's in his work a lot. And so I thought he's natural for this. The particular predicate for it, of course, was the fact that these holy men, all of them representing different strands of Christianity and Judaism, meet in Jerusalem for a sole purpose. And the sole purpose is to ban a gay rights march in Jerusalem. And they do that. So it's just, they look like holy men, but they're actually also deeply unholy.
I know. Very unholy.
They're hostile to people who live lives that don't offend them or shouldn't offend them. So anyway, that was the idea, that I could talk to that point at that point in time, because the whole AIDS epidemic had left people shaken, very divided, and so on and so forth. I thought this would be a time to put some work in that was, you didn't know what it was about exactly, but if you pulled a thread, you would find out it was about a lot of things that many people had a stake in. And that was what happened, in fact. Now, I had an experience, which was that I told this to some people who I was standing around talking to the exhibition about. And the next thing I know, I had a message from the local archdiocese, and they wanted to bring a group of nuns and priests to the exhibition. And they wanted me, who is not at all Christian, to speak to these issues for that group. And I found it fascinating. I found it very helpful, because they were serious. They were really troubled by it. They were really curious about it, but they wanted to see what I would say. And so they listened. And we had a very good exchange.
Fantastic. Very, John?
I've had difficulty hearing everybody, so I'm not sure. I think you said, how did I discover Kami? Was that the question?
How did you find out about Kami and decide to include and bring attention to his work and showcase his work?
Well, when I met him, I had met him in Paris in the 80s, but since 89 or 90, we became friends. I think I was always looking to see if I could bring the work to MoMA. And at that point, MoMA was a very different space than it is today. It was very difficult to bring in emerging artists, especially from different cultures. So once I thought of the exhibition architecture as metaphor, I thought this was a perfect occasion to bring the work. And then again, I did it later on in Without Boundary, and later on in Safar in Toronto, in Vancouver, and then so on and so forth. And most recently, the show in Aga Khan. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's great. Question for Kami. The question is, of the modern artists, who do you believe has influenced your work?
Modern artists, but there are so many modern artists. I mean, you're talking about 20th century, 21st century, both.
Question is open to you to decipher and respond to.
There are a number of artists, painters, sculptors that I love in European or American. I don't know who to name. I love like everybody else. I love Picasso, I love Matisse, I love Jackson Pollock, and I love de Kooning. Rob Storr made two exhibitions that I really, for me, was such a discovery. One was of Robert Ryman at Museum of Modern Art in New York, which was an extraordinary retrospective of Ryman. And the other was, I mean, among many other shows that he curated, was Tony Smith, the exhibition that he made of Tony Smith's sculpture at MoMA was an enormous revelation for me.
Fantastic. Fereshteh, is there any other questions you might have right now amongst ourselves before we close the session?
No, unfortunately, I can't think of an interesting question right now. So,
okay. And Robert, is there anything you'd like to say or close with?
I would just like to come back to Ferry and underscore what she said, which is that when we think of art history being written in forward motion in time, with old civilizations, that's not necessarily the case. And so that when she says that modernism in her lifetime in Iran meant doubling back on certain kinds of figuration that Americans or Europeans would dismiss as being passé, but in fact, it was a discovery because it had never existed before in Iran in the same way. That is really interesting. That made my mind go pop. I realized how blindsided I was by certain things. So that is a real discovery for me. And that is a really important point to make wherever you can make it.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Kamijan, we would like to close with some words from you. And if there's happens to be anything coming up you'd like to be sharing with us at this point.
I just want to thank you, thank Alireza, thank Ferry, and thank Rob for your insights and your talks.
Thank you all for this time. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you to dear Kami, Fereshteh, Robert for today's captivating talk. We were honored to have you all on Farhang Connect for this incredible conversation. And special thanks to Roshi for moderating today's conversation. Please note that today's talk was recorded and will be made available on farhang.org, where you may watch this and all our many episodes of the series. As always, we invite you to visit farhang.org for our latest upcoming events, talks, performances, and programs. We are truly grateful to you, our dedicated global audience, for spending your Saturday with us, and we look forward to welcoming you again next time. Until then, we bid you all farewell. Thank you, Kami John. Thank you, Fereshteh John. Thank you, Robert John, and Roshi John. And thank you for spending your day with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.